There comes a moment in every person's life when they must pause, look around their environment, and ask a very honest, very important question. What have I allowed into my home that does not honor my peace, my purpose, or my God? Because whether we realize it or not, the atmosphere of our home shapes the atmosphere of our heart. The things we surround ourselves with influence the thoughts we think, the emotions we feel, and the spiritual energy we carry into each new day. A home is not just walls, floors, and furniture. A home is a spiritual ecosystem. It is a garden, and everything within that garden either produces fruit or poison. It either nurtures the soul or contaminates it. It either invites light or opens the door to darkness. And many times, the darkness that tries to settle in our lives does not enter through dramatic events or obvious attacks. It enters quietly, subtly, through small objects, hidden corners, and unnoticed items that carry emotional residue, spiritual heaviness, or symbolic meaning that contradicts the life God wants for us. Some objects may look harmless, but they carry memories that wound the heart. Some items may appear decorative, but they hold associations that pull the spirit downward. Some things may seem innocent, but they open unseen doors that should never be opened. A home becomes heavy not because of what is happening outside, but often because of what was never removed inside. When God wants to bring new peace into your home, He often begins by prompting you to clean what you've ignored, remove what you've tolerated, and surrender what you've held on to for far too long. Because darkness does not need permission to enter when we willingly provide a place for it to rest. And light cannot flourish where the atmosphere has been polluted with things that do not belong. This is why the calling today is simple yet profound. Remove these 7 objects immediately, because they invite darkness into your home. The first object is anything connected to past pain that still carries emotional weight, gifts from broken relationships, items from painful seasons, pictures that remind you of heartbreak, or belongings attached to betrayal, trauma, or loss. People often keep these things because they feel too small to matter, but objects can hold emotional signatures. When you keep something tied to a season God delivered you from, you unknowingly keep the wound open. That item becomes a reservoir of old memories, old disappointments, old fears, and old versions of yourself that God is trying to transform. Every time you look at it, even unconsciously, you reinforce the pain rather than the healing. You were not created to live as a museum of your past suffering. When you remove what carries emotional residue, you make space for peace to breathe, for clarity to return, and for your spirit to recover from battles you should no longer be fighting. Next are objects connected to bitterness or unforgiveness. Letters you kept just to remind yourself of what someone did, screenshots of conversations that betrayed your trust, or items you hold on to simply because they justify your anger. These objects do not protect you. They poison you. They keep your mind replaying stories you should have surrendered to God long ago. They anchor your heart in a narrative of hurt instead of freedom. Darkness thrives where unforgiveness lives. Letting go of these objects is not losing power. It is reclaiming your peace. It is releasing the emotional chains that have tied your home to an atmosphere of heaviness. When you finally remove them, you will feel the air shift, the room lighten, and your heart begin to breathe again. The third object includes anything that symbolizes fear, superstition, or reliance on spiritual substitutes, charms, talismans, items believed to ward off evil, or objects kept for luck. These things seem harmless, even cultural, but they quietly train the mind to trust created things instead of the Creator. They teach the spirit to depend on superstition instead of prayer. Anything you trust more than God becomes a doorway for darkness. When you keep objects that represent fear-based protection, you are essentially announcing that God's covering is not enough. But the truth is this: the safest home is not the one filled with charms. It is the one filled with divine presence. Removing these objects breaks the subconscious agreement with fear and replaces it with the authority, confidence, and peace that only God can give. The fourth object that must go is anything connected to spiritual confusion, occult symbols, books or objects that glorify darkness, artwork that represents harmful spiritual themes, or items from practices designed to manipulate energy rather than seek God's guidance. Some people keep these out of curiosity or aesthetic appeal, but spiritual symbolism is not neutral. It influences the subconscious. It shapes the atmosphere. It opens doors you cannot see. When you entertain objects rooted in darkness, you allow unseen influences to interfere with your peace, your dreams, your clarity, and your emotional balance. Removing them is not fear, it is wisdom. It is choosing purity over confusion, light over shadows, and truth over imitation. Fifth are objects that clutter your home mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Piles of unused items, broken objects you never repair, closets stuffed with things you will never use, and corners filled with items that drain your energy by simply being there. Clutter is not just physical, it is spiritual. A cluttered room creates a cluttered mind. A cluttered mind creates spiritual numbness, and spiritual numbness gives darkness permission to settle quietly because you no longer have the clarity to recognize what is wrong. When you declutter, you are not just cleaning your space, you are cleansing your spirit. You are removing distractions, unnecessary noise, and emotional weight that has silently been pressing against your peace. Decluttering is a spiritual act of authority. It tells darkness there is no place for chaos in this home. It makes room for divine order, focus, and fresh beginnings. The sixth object is anything connected to comparison, insecurity, or self-condemnation. Clothing you keep even though it makes you feel inadequate, images or decor that distort your view of beauty, or items tied to unhealthy standards the world has imposed on you. These objects whisper lies every time you see them. They reinforce shame, feed insecurity, and weaken your sense of identity. Darkness thrives wherever self-worth is under attack. Removing these items is not vanity, it is protection. It is silencing the voices that make you forget who you are. It is reclaiming your dignity, your confidence, and your God-given identity. It is saying, my home will not be a place where my spirit is belittled. When you remove these objects, you create a home where your soul can breathe without judgment and grow without fear. Finally, the seventh object includes anything that replaces connection, love, or unity within your home. Items that keep your family isolated, like devices or entertainment sources that feed addiction, steal time, or create emotional distance. These are the silent destroyers of peace. They create homes where people live together but do not connect, where hearts drift apart, and where presence is replaced by distraction. Darkness does not always enter violently. Sometimes it enters through screens that steal joy, silence conversations, and weaken relationships. When you begin removing or limiting these objects, you reopen the doorway to laughter, warmth, understanding, and togetherness. You restore the heart of your home. You create an atmosphere where love can flourish again. When these 7 objects are removed, objects of pain, bitterness, fear, confusion, clutter, insecurity, and disconnection, you begin to notice something remarkable. The atmosphere shifts, the air feels lighter, the rooms feel brighter, your sleep becomes deeper, your thoughts become clearer, your emotions stabilize, your spirit grows more sensitive to God's voice. This is the power of spiritual cleansing. It is not superstition, it is stewardship. It is taking responsibility for the environment that shapes your soul daily. A home is a reflection of the heart. When a home is filled with reminders of pain, when heart becomes heavy, when a home is filled with symbols of fear, the spirit becomes anxious. When a home is filled with clutter, the mind becomes scattered. When a home is filled with confusion, the soul becomes restless. But when a home is filled with peace, the heart heals. When a home is filled with purity, the spirit strengthens. When a home is filled with light, the mind clears. When a home is filled with God's presence, darkness has no place to hide. You were not created to live in a home that drains you. You were created to live in a sanctuary that restores you. A place where you can breathe deeply, think clearly, pray freely, and love fully. A place where joy is nurtured, dreams are strengthened, relationships are protected, and divine presence is welcomed. But to build such a home, you must begin with courage. You must decide today that you will no longer tolerate what steals your peace. You will no longer hold on to what God has already asked you to release. You will no longer let nostalgia, fear, or uncertainty keep you connected to things that were never meant to stay. You will no longer decorate your home with objects that damage your spirit. You will no longer allow darkness to disguise itself as harmless. When you begin removing what does not belong, you awaken something powerful within yourself. You take authority. You declare ownership of your atmosphere. You reclaim the spiritual territory of your home. And the moment you do this, darkness loses its grip. Peace begins to rise. Light begins to grow. Strength begins to return. And God's presence begins to settle into every corner. Removing these objects is not just cleaning your home, it is cleansing your future. It is making room for new blessings, new clarity, new breakthroughs, and new seasons of divine favor. It is preparing an atmosphere where miracles are welcome, where wisdom is heard, and where your heart is safe to grow into everything God designed it to be. And once the removal is done, something even greater happens. You begin to replace. You fill your home with objects that speak life, not death, items that inspire growth, not fear, symbols of faith, not superstition, memories that heal, not hurt, decor that uplifts, not burdens, practices that unite, not divide, atmospheres that carry peace, not pressure. You begin to cultivate a home where love is felt the moment someone enters the door, where laughter echoes through the rooms, where prayer permeates the walls, where rest is natural, where joy is contagious, where the presence of God is unmistakable. This is not just a physical transformation, it is a spiritual declaration. It is saying to darkness, you have no place here. This home belongs to light, so today let your courage rise. Walk through your home with new eyes. Pick up each object and ask yourself, does this bring me peace, or does it steal it? Does this help me grow, or does it hold me back? Does this honor God, or does it distract me from Him? Does this fill my heart with light, or does it invite darkness? And whatever the answer reveals, act immediately. Because your home matters. Your peace matters. Your spirit matters. And the atmosphere you create within these walls will shape the life you live beyond them. Remove these 7 objects now, because what you allow into your home shapes what you allow into your heart. And you deserve a home full of light, purity, joy, clarity, unity, and divine protection. A home where darkness cannot enter and God's presence never leaves. This message awakens the listener to the profound realization that a home is far more than a physical structure or a place where the body finds rest. It is a living, breathing spiritual atmosphere that shapes the condition of the heart and the direction of the soul. It reminds us that every object we bring in, every memory we hold on to, and every influence we tolerate contributes to the energy that fills our rooms. A home can become a sanctuary where peace, clarity, and divine presence dwell, or it can slowly transform into a space where heaviness, confusion, and emotional darkness quietly settle. This truth calls the listener to pay attention, to recognize that what we allow inside our walls doesn't stay external, it seeps into our spirit, affects our thoughts, and influences our daily walk. It urges us to see our home as a sacred environment that either nurtures light or silently hosts darkness, depending entirely on the choices we make and the atmosphere we intentionally cultivate. It emphasizes that some objects, though they may appear harmless, sentimental, or purely decorative on the surface, carry a deeper emotional, spiritual, and psychological weight that subtly influences the atmosphere of our home. These items, whether connected to past pain, broken relationships, negative memories, or unhealthy seasons of life, can quietly drain our peace without us realizing it. They can cloud our thoughts, disturb our spiritual sensitivity, and create an invisible heaviness that lingers in the background of our daily routines. What seems like just a photograph, a gift, a keepsake, or a piece of decor may actually be a silent doorway through which old wounds, unresolved emotions, and spiritual confusion re-enter our lives. This message makes it clear that such objects don't just sit on shelves or rest in drawers. They affect the energy of the rooms we live in, shaping the mood we wake up with, the rest we experience, and the clarity with which we hear God's direction. By recognizing the unseen weight these items carry, we are empowered to protect our peace, reclaim our spiritual atmosphere, and create a home where light, healing, and divine presence are free to flourish. It urges every believer to rise with courage and take intentional action, understanding that a pure and peaceful home does not happen by accident. It is created by the choices we make and the atmosphere we guard. It calls each person to look honestly at what has been allowed to remain in their living space, to confront anything that corrupts the spiritual environment, and to remove every object that carries negativity, heaviness, or darkness. This is not merely about cleaning a room, it is about cleansing the soul's environment. The message invites the believer to replace these harmful elements with things that nourish purity, deepen clarity, and welcome divine protection. It encourages filling the home with symbols of faith, reminders of hope, practices of prayer, and objects that inspire spiritual wholeness. It challenges every believer to intentionally cultivate a space where God's presence is not only welcomed but felt, where peace rests like a warm blanket, where joy flows naturally, and where every room becomes a refuge rather than a battlefield. By taking these steps, the home transforms from a place of routine living into a sacred sanctuary, a place where the heart can recover, the mind can rest, and the spirit can grow strong. It becomes an atmosphere where distractions fade, darkness loses its grip, and God's presence becomes the defining fragrance of the entire space.